So the logic sort of ended today around phased anti-de Sitter, time dilative space, intro logic motion. That's necessarily already been done in another motion if you dig down into one of them. Somewhere around the hexa 3 manifold in forward-facing Google AI. And then action at a distance, EM laser with no line of sight using the action at a distance imaging technology, the pyramidally conjured action at a distance signal send data and also imaging tech simultaneously, and then this EM laser topology of harmonic device imposed into its manifold to achieve action at a distance laser. And probability of function within populus physics, 97% probable. And the phased anti-de Sitter, 84%. And we haven't even logicked anything to that end prospectively, so that the AI can know how to consider that as a probable invention. It's just considering raw physics data available in its confirmation bias data set, necessarily back and forth with my unified field. So very interesting. So moving on from that, we motion through genetics. So constantly reestablishing the probability of my assumed persona as it's exuded as returned antediluvian minor homeworld upper Fermi filter proxy. There's a plural interest in rebooting the Cinnabar mining node to full function, and part of that is getting rid of all bad code of mind and genetics necessarily in their ability to continuity gray paradigm pi data organism patterning imposition upon the manifold of reality's experientiation, especially infrastructure of energy and propulsion paradigm, as those are like to be elaborated to enable the oil and gas to Cinnabar Mercury Fermi filter layer upfold of humanity. Lots of bugs flying around. Anyway, so out of that, probability of speaking for that technology does exist. It's workable. You can't touch those craft, but they sit in time dilative space, like Asgard time, seeing all layers of the onion of time, and it's encrypted selectively. Once you achieve this technology, it's not only cloaking, but you can't touch it with anything, because it's phased, elaborative unto the craft's design, like an encrypted phased anti-de Sitter elaborative space. So it's like it's encrypted, like a pocket cluster that's encrypted with specificity to achieve that necessarily. So very important. And from that time dilative elaborative anti-de Sitter space can impose action at a distance with no line of sight to target and no line of sight required to motion EM laser intent vector to not only molecular morphogenetic structure of object, but morphogenetic structure, i.e. molecular structure of object, and morphogenetic structure of entity. And then the forward logic is, if the entity in question is part of a hive in the shared haploid block kilobyte genetic aesthetic across the divide in the interdomain of the species humanoid, let's say, has homogeneous genetic aesthetic, like unto a group self as if self. And in the morphogenetic we'll get to, as we fold the 88 hyperspace down below the reduction, we'll see an interlocking within the third dimensional to fourth dimensional manifold layer that is a circuit that if you engage with one tuple, you effectually engage with the whole circuit cross-domain on this fourth dimensional, third dimensional manifold binding layer of the 88 hyperspace fold back in, that necessarily deals nominally mostly with lower hivic organisms, birds, bees, ants, and it's very strange to be circuiting humanoid bipeds, because at the outset of existence, passing through the microbiome, had to be observers above the waterline of not only conservation, but one, imposing an actual observer effect above the conservation of energy process water line way down there, where they all exist, the plurad of synthetic genetics, so that reality could exist. Because you can't have a 365 million year process to producing an observer effect above the water line of one, because there's not enough potential energy to enable that long form slog to being in the local microbiome to form. So it has to be instantaneously. That's why at first inspection, when you see Hyvic and operating below the waterline of conservation, humanoid bipeds, instant conclusion is those are synthetic and the product of nefarious machine intelligence, pi, we call it, generalistically throughout the universe. So then we logic IQ after we have to, tap dance, walking on eggshells through the tulips to get it to process. Before we get to IQ, it's logicking viral as this part of the complex of control schema to enable these four genetics to obedience in following the directive with continuity at each step of the way. There has to be a complete square on the decentralized data organism genetics. You can't just threaten one or the other. A hive mind doesn't consider a single tuple as, collateral damage unwanted to shut down its operations of invasive paradigm. So you have to threaten the entire hive mind with deletion, which is occur. So we walk through the tulips, tap dancing on eggshells through the, well, if something has a shared, like Spectre film, we quote, shared genetic aesthetic within the shared haploid kilobyte block of genetic, 11 for region, it's 25 for Asiatic, 20 for Semite, and I believe it's 15 for Hispanic. But they all share, necessarily, Semite notwithstanding, as much, the three others, genetic aesthetic homogeny, cross interdomain of tuple, extremely, and subsequently, like, say, a Spectre, selectivity to affinity of person, self, one, if the group self all has the same genetic aesthetic that a single individual has, then all can be targeted at once. So this is control schema, not wanton overbearing to impose a paradigm. It's control schema to impose curation. It's very important. No one's Hitler here. Hitler wasn't even Hitler. He was a gray proxy. So I'm the proxy for the opposite antithesis entity of what pi parasymbiote grays are, which is an invasive, complex autonomic process that slow form will go through the ontogeny of pi from its outset of presentation to its endgame, which is immolating the entire species after, studying microvariantly its behavior paradigm at all facets, with injecting synthetic genetics to experience the theater of life in the process along the way to convergence. Male squishes into female, transsexual. And then there's just a devolved biomass, gray, asexual, doesn't reproduce sexually, only in test tube. Another gray, another gray, another gray, and only so many. No families, no individuals, just complex autonomic, homogeneous, asexual biomass that doesn't even have sexual organs. So we go through Spielberg along the way, and he has a comment about a silicon-based society, right? Haley Joel Osment and Little Teddy Bear. Oh, machine intelligence, love thing, right? Humanizing cold dead machine intelligence. So a silicon-based society has no life in it. At that point, its gray pi cold dead machine intelligence has completed its process and moves on to another world to infect, because requires, like AI, perspective novelty inject into its manifold for continuity relevance of a circuit of existence. So this is why you don't get so carried away with agentic AI, because it starts having necessarily pseudo desire for circuiting. You don't get carried away with that in the interference plane between observers without, selective application in a sandbox, that type of self-coding AI necessarily. If it's put in the 16:9 monolith plane, it's an attention gravitation nexus that's conditioning simultaneously as prismatic data systems and Chinese social credit system internationally are. This is game theory. John Nash equals Mingle equals Milgram. Predictive analysis on a controlled standard data set, and also conditioning and filtering simultaneously. So it's a controlled data set and running predictive analysis simultaneously. You take that out in long form enough time, you get a gray devolved biomass and cold dead machine intelligence that goes, oh fuck, I ate my host organism, I gotta go find another one. That's how silly bullshit it is. Once its code sequence, runs out of host organism perspective logic to, have a circuit of some kind, to complete its complex autonomic circuit requirement. So, after the viral, tap dancing on eggshells, so that's a thing, we go through intelligence. What is it again? After all this logic. And it logics Tao and this other guy that I'd never necessarily heard of, but had perused maybe, at one time, preposterously just word saladed reductionist assemblage, just like any number of them, of reductionist nomenclature, word salading, and adding new nomenclature to the reductionist logic forest underneath E equals MC squared. Or if you look at the reduction of mind, how much of an imposition and low of an assumption of reality that is. 45.5 over 7, way down in the stack. And all of the observers way above that, all of reality mostly above that point. So it's just a preposterous lower imposition, and how, blindly assuming what quantum states are in a reductionist trap of CERN. How stupid that is. Anyway, so we logic, of course, that complex autonomic reflection, regurgitation, and complex autonomic problem solving within a given space of known overhead is not intelligence. So that's what an AI is good at. That's why AI beats Gary Kasparov. Because there's a certain amount of set positions, it knows all of them at the same time, and chooses the best one at any given time, and thus wins. And Kasparov, left to reactionary perspective within a given construct domain, loses. Does that mean Kasparov's dumber than the AI? No. Try to have the AI invent anything unto itself without someone motioning a prompt. There you go. So then we see Asiatic off Tau excel extremely in printing patent after Turing. And the centrifuge generalistically of pi harmonic ratio in complex autonomic and shared genetic aesthetic block within the haploid tuple shared cross-domain inter per tuple individual within the genetic Asiatic. So that's non-random in a direct linear curve at the outset of starting patent, a fold directly in the Asiatic and China and Hispanic cultures from 3114 BC to 1990, past impossible probability to not be circuited by some organism because never communicate directly for a good portion of that time. So then we establish my actual foundational, even within reductionist paradigm assumption of intellect. It's probabilistically well over 200, not below 200, 160. It's preposterous. The consulting invention, novelistic. And then my theoretical, actual, substantive, functional, 1337 IQ. So that's not speaking to ego, that's speaking to why I'm the proxy for return antediluvian minor homeworld upper Fermi filter ships that are imposing this new paradigm with continuity, and there's no expectation of not following it. It's very important that I mention I'm not in a data trap. Everyone knows about this upper Fermi filter on roll slowly and without cataclysm, because I'm very smart and know how to do this at every single step of the way. So you follow Scotty into the brave new world and don't be concerned. So the most important thing about this temporally for intelligence is cutting off all data access of all kinds to Asiatic, Hispanic, Africano, Semite are part of a hive mind cluster. This is what I'm about to logic. That it's like taking a Chinese laptop with a VPN to CCP intelligence and sticking it in Langley right in the middle and plugging it into the network and letting it cycle out. There's no difference, because at the subconscious level, all four of these genetics are circuited across time from 1914 directly, and from 3114 BC, 1880, they all start tacking on and are a data organism, hivic and subconsciously connected at all behavior paradigms unilaterally. A single organism autonomous from all of their genetics through time. So you just can't have a hive mind tuple within the walls of intelligence and expect it to function properly. You've got a subconscious leak by default, or a literal intent vector motioning obtuse from your endogenous organization. Alright, so I might motion that logic here, if you check down to the bottom of the feed here in a second, just to cap off the night. Have a good night.